From Kyle, Texas, it's my dad, Marty Seldom Used Reserve Coleman. And from West Orange, New Jersey, it's Casey the Beef Cregan. I'm Parker Coleman, and it's time for the show you've been waiting for all week, Sluggo.
Casey, we're brought in by that soon-to-be high schooler, Parker Coleman. Now, next time you and I get together next week, Parker Coleman will be a high schooler. But bigger news than that. Tonight, you are live from College Station, Texas, in Jimbo Fisher's pool house. Folks, it is Jimbo's pool boy, Casey the Beef Cregan. Casey,
yeah, I'm great. I hope people actually tune in to watch this and see my freshly acquired new Texas A&M shirt. They sent it to me because of my pick. They sent me a whole truckload worth of stuff. No, they didn't really, but it was cheap on Amazon Prime. Yeah, I'm here. I'm actually at my home front tonight. Excited to be back home. Not traveling anytime soon, I don't think, and glad to be back here with you.
It's really cool. I look forward to this every Wednesday, and it's kind of a special night for us, right? Because this week we actually have games to talk about and college football, Division I college football, as our friend would say. Not a lot of games, but we'll get to those in a second. But season is scheduled to start in earnest, kind of 5 games this week that we're going to talk about. But I had a question for you. Young Parker Coleman is an Astros fan, and last week the Astros managed to cram 2 games into 7 days because of a lot of external factors and you know, all kind of things, hurricanes and but one of the things that caused that problem was a positive test by theoretically an Oakland A's player, and it got me to thinking. I mean, there was just one positive out of both teams and all the staff. They didn't even say it was a player. It could have been one of the staff members. But it got me to thinking, what are we going to do if post-game one football player tests positive? How is it? Is that going to cause the whole thing to come to a stop, or what's the deal? Do you know?
I don't know. However, I did hear some talking heads this week on ESPN Radio and other shows that I happen to listen to say that they're going to take the approach that Major League Baseball takes, which is basically shut it down for a couple days and then keep pressing with everybody else. So it brought up the point that some of these teams aren't going to be playing the same amount of games. I know in Major League Baseball at the end of the year, they're theoretically supposed to play 60 games each, but we're not sure once it gets to that drop-dead date where they need to start the playoffs, whether or not it's actually going to start. So it feels like, especially because there's no bubble in college football, that they're going to keep doing the press-on thing, whether or not these kids have to go into some sort of quarantine or for 10 days or so. They're gone 3 weeks, I think. There was somebody on Twitter yesterday, I wish I would remember who it was, said basically if a Clemson player were to get sick as of the last test, which was yesterday, they would miss the Citadel game as well. Oh. So that was already 2 weeks. So you're already thinking 10-game season, you get sick, you get a positive test, you're missing at least 2 games. It's just like a suspension, it feels like. But I don't know what it would take to shut the whole team down, which I think is what you were asking.
Yeah, because in baseball, and you mentioned Major League Baseball too, and that's really our reference here because the NBA is in the bubble. These college football players aren't in a bubble, maybe a semi-bubble, a half bubble. I mean, it's not the same though with 120 team members and untold amount of staff members. You know, there's probably upwards of 200 people around every team. Which is obviously different than maybe the 20 or 25 around an NBA team. But, I was talking about the whole team. I'm just wondering what's going to happen. And perhaps it's dependent on the position. I made the joke earlier to our friend Nelson. We were chatting on Facebook, Nelson from our Facebook group, and shout out to Nelson for the help he's providing for Casey and I, giving us a little breather. But we were chatting earlier, and I was saying, well, Travis Etienne's in the clear against Wake Forest because nobody's going to get within 6 feet of him for 2.5 seconds in that Wake Forest game. How about that? I thought that was pretty funny.
That is pretty funny. That's a good joke there.
I'm proud of myself for that one.
Their defense is actually pretty good. It might be the strong point of the Wake Forest team, but we'll dive into that next week.
Yes, sir. Hey, and I think it's just the beginning of the 2020 season. The season of the great unknown. We don't know. My story a few weeks ago was we don't know what's going to happen in an hour, much less tomorrow or next week. Somebody was saying, "What's going to happen next week?" I'm like, "Next week? What's going to happen?" Check your phone because something may have happened. And speaking of something happening, Georgia, one of my darlings, obviously, I picked him to make the playoff. That will change, by the way, tonight. Additional information. We're hearing that Jamie Newman has opted out after transferring from Wake Forest to Georgia. Of course, he wasn't aware of the COVID situation. He has now opted out, which with JT Daniels not cleared from injury, I think you mentioned that to me earlier. Georgia's hurting at the quarterback position.
Yeah, they're down to a true freshman leading the charge here unless something happens with JT Daniels over the next week. Rumor has that he will be cleared to play opening weekend. However, you're still going to you have a week remaining before a game and you're not medically cleared to play. You haven't truly, now I know they protect quarterbacks, but you haven't really truly tested yourself to the extent that maybe some of these teams and coaches want you to be. But it is interesting, that Jamie Newman did opt out to play, to get himself ready. Nelson and I were also going back and forth a little bit today on the Facebook page about the fact that he probably needed an extra year and even the step up in competition maybe from Wake Forest to Georgia playing the SEC schedule that would really help him. And heck, Georgia fans were all head over heels in love with the guy when he decided to transfer over to him. So I don't know why he did it. Maybe he lost the job. That's the only thing I can think of. But that's definitely the narrative that's going to come about. Maybe he's got some extenuating circumstances that he is actually fearful of COVID-19. We don't know. He hasn't spoken yet. It's just everyone has the story, of course, and here we are. And now Georgia's scrambling with a week and a half to go before their first game for a quarterback.
I had just mentioned last night that I was hearing on the Cover 3 podcast, which I listen to regularly, they were saying that they expected in-season opt-outs for a variety of reasons. Maybe, the old Derek King thing. Somebody starts off 1-3 and go, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself at risk for a team that's, not in competition for a championship, and then there's people who will say, well, you're letting your team down, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not here to make that judgment. I'm just saying there are various reasons people could opt out. Maybe they get hurt. Maybe their team isn't doing good. Maybe they decide, maybe something changes in their family and their risk gets too high and they just don't want to play or don't think it's safe to play anymore. So somebody could be 6-0 and have their starting quarterback opt out, for example. That's not likely to happen, but think of it. What if Trevor Lawrence says, hey, Clemson is 6-0, and this doesn't seem like Trevor at all, but I'm just using that as an example. What if Clemson's 6-0 and Trevor says, I've thrown for 24 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, completed 78% of my passes. I'm going to be the number one pick. Why am I going to risk the rest of this season for what's at risk for Trevor? Tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions probably.
Yeah, I said a couple of years ago when the whole transfer portal really started to take shape and now it's got a mind of its own, but that was a slippery slope. I think adding this to the mix is even going to add more to it. You were going to have opt-outs for probably health reasons. And like you said, like the Derek King thing, the whole thing at Houston last year where it felt like the whole team went into the transfer portal about 4 weeks in. I mean, we saw it at Clemson with Kelly Bryant a couple of years ago where he played the 4 games and then left school. I think that's still going to happen now. And maybe a lot of these older guys are going to play 4 games. And like you said, pad the stat book. Thank God Spencer Rattler can't do that this year, right? He can't leave yet. But his stats are going to be high.
My man.
And then, yeah, that is your man. But it's going to be fun, man, and fun not necessarily in the good variety of the word. It's going to be every week is going to be something, and like you said, we don't even know what goes on every hour. Now we're going to fast forward to a week, and we're gonna have news. We're gonna have things to talk about. I think every week on this show.
No doubt, we might have to go to twice a week.
My wife will kill me, but that's fine.
Breaking news. If you're stuck with Texas A&M for a year, I think I'm stuck with Spencer Rattler. I
like your odds better than mine, though.
Good point. Hey, because he's got a great coach that develops quarterbacks. Hey, this is a little exercise I did a couple of years ago when I was writing for a website, and it kind of fell apart over the last couple of weeks with the Big Ten and Pac-12, at least the Big Ten, opting out of the season because Pac-12 doesn't have, in my mind, didn't have any national championship contenders, but obviously the Big Ten did with Ohio State. We like to talk about how crazy and wild college football is, how nutty it can get, how anybody can beat anybody on any given Saturday, Thursday, or if you're in the MAC, Tuesday or Wednesday. Anybody can beat anybody, right? But I really started looking at it, and yes, that's true. I mean, you can have upsets. You can have your Army almost beating Oklahoma or your Appalachian State beating Michigan. But when it comes right down to it, you can kind of sit here in a normal year. This is a bizarre one, but in a normal year and say there are about 5 or 6 teams that can win the national championship. I mean, this isn't college baseball. Fresno State and Coastal Carolina aren't walking into the national championship game in January. They could this year, theoretically, but in your normal year, they're not going to be showing up at Miami Gardens. So I looked at this. This is back when all 130 teams were still playing, and I kind of mashed it up. So we'll go back and forth between 130 teams and I think the 76 that are playing now. I started off with really 6 teams: Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma, and I included Penn State in there. I read something on Penn State and thought maybe because they had a big game with Ohio State. Well, we can already eliminate Ohio State, who I was going to pick as the national champion, and we can eliminate Penn State. So you're really left with Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, and Oklahoma. Alabama has a new-ish quarterback, got some experience last year or 2, got hurt. Georgia had, past tense, a transfer from Wake Forest and a transfer from Southern Cal who's injured. Oklahoma has a new quarterback. He's going to be good. We've talked about this and went back and forth. He's going to have 3,000 yards, depending on how many games he plays. I'll say 300 yards a game plus. So here's some facts about the playoffs. And I mentioned this in a previous podcast, at least to some extent. 71% of the playoff teams, this is playoff era only, have been named Clemson, Alabama, Oklahoma, or Ohio State. Almost 3/4 of the teams in the playoffs. Here's an even better one. 67% of the champions and, not or, 67% of the runners-up have been named Clemson or Alabama. So 2/3 of the time, your champion and your runner-up are going to be named Clemson and Alabama. The Big 12 and the Pac-12 have combined for a 1-6 record in the playoff era. We know Oklahoma's 0-4, thanks in large part to Clemson. But given the quarterbacks and the teams that I'd mentioned, it was obvious that Ohio State and Clemson stood out to me. And Alabama's a close third. They just didn't have the quarterback on the level of Trevor and Justin Fields. They do have Mac Jones and Bryce Young. But it's not just a matter of the history that I talked about. It's everything. It's the recruiting, it's the coaching, it's the motivation. To win without any of those things, and we know Dabo and Nick Saban can motivate, and Ryan Day's looking pretty good. Shorter tenure, but he's looking good. So the 3 teams that stood out to me when you're including all 130 were Clemson, Alabama, and Ohio State. And I was going to take Ohio State to win the national championship. As you know, when you and I and Locks discussed this earlier, I ended up taking Clemson over Alabama. It's just not likely that Oklahoma 0-4 is going to win 2 playoff games in my estimation. But the other teams, I think that would make 70 this year and 124 or so on a regular year. They're just playing for fun, man. It's the same teams every year. It's Alabama, it's Clemson, toss in a little Ohio State. Notre Dame makes an occasional appearance. Maybe that 4th position is up for grabs, but the first general 3 are going to be those 3. And I don't think there was any doubt about that this year. Give me your thoughts on that.
Well, that begs the question then, is college football boring? I've had this conversation with others in the past, and I love every week of college football, and it's said ad nauseum that every week is so important. Every game is so important. One loss could knock you out of any sort of national championship chances. And so every game is like a playoff game. However, when the cream rises to the top, as we say, at the end of the season, and it seems to be at least 3 of the same 4 teams at the end, I refuse to say it's boring, especially with the success that my school has had recently. But even in 2014, when my school wasn't close, really, they were, I guess, kind of. But Florida State was Florida State and beat the crap out of Clemson in Death Valley. I still thought the playoff was a lot of fun. Now, those 4 teams were a little different, but I don't know. I'm dragging this conversation down a little bit here, but I love the sport. I love the fact that I don't think it's boring because of the turnover of the players. I mean, heck, Jacob Coker was a national championship winning quarterback. What's he doing now? Selling insurance somewhere? They didn't have the quarterback names at Alabama, but man, they got the star power.
Well, it's boring. It's boring in that the same teams are there. To some people, to you and me and other Clemson fans, it's not boring because Clemson's one of those teams. But I could imagine be on the outside looking in at that saying, how boring can you get? Same teams, everything. But the championship games, at least for 3 quarters last year, wasn't boring. And certainly the 2 years before that, weren't boring at all. Now, look at these teams. And I look at Alabama's schedule. They have to play your tough Texas A&M Aggies. Georgia, they're at LSU, which at LSU is not the same as it was last week, right?
Literally, yeah. That's exactly right. More opt-outs there.
And that's Alabama's only true road game out of those big games. So they're going to go through. Now, Georgia had a 3-week stretch of Auburn and Tennessee at home, then at Alabama and then Florida later, with Alabama being the only road game. But who knows what that means for Georgia now. I think your buddy Zach Locks Parker could probably be one of the better quarterbacks on the roster if he was signed up for Georgia. Oklahoma, they have back-to-back. They play at Iowa State and then Texas in Dallas. So that's an interesting back-to-back in October for the Sooners. And Clemson, I think, if you look at this the way they sit now with LSU losing half of their roster, Clemson may have one of the tougher schedules. They play at Notre Dame. That's at the end of 6 straight weeks. Then they have a week off. They go to Florida State. Then they play Pitt and at Virginia Tech, finish with 8 games in 9 weeks. And talk about all this buys and weeks off. Clemson plays 8 out of 9 weeks. And 2 of their biggest games, probably their biggest games, Notre Dame and Florida State on the road. So the bottom line for me, with the news out of Georgia today about Jamie Newman, looks like Oklahoma, Clemson, Alabama, and I hate to do this because I really don't believe in them, but I'm going to put Florida Gators. No, not Texas A&M. The Florida Gators are now my 14. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a smart play. I mean, it stinks that we are always looking for the next SEC team, the second SEC team, and we're not talking about a Pittsburgh who columnist David Hale is very big on ESPN.com, which I found surprising. Or in Notre Dame, like Locks picked, to give Clemson fits this year, playing them 9 times or something like that. I don't remember exactly what he said, but yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Florida's going to be there, I think, if they can get the quarterback position figured out, which I think they did, especially addition by subtraction, losing Felipe Franks, I think, is really going to help. And Trask should take a step up as a sophomore. That's a smart pick. I'm high on them this year. I probably should have picked them in my SEC rather than take that team out of College Station, Texas. But I like that. I like that subtraction and addition for your top 4.
Cool. And speaking of Zach Locks, Parker, he's joined us now. Before we get to Zach and make our picks for this week, I wanted to give a brief mention to our friend Turji at the Pit Boss Sauce Company. He's got a brand new website up there. Click and sauce will come to your house or wherever you want it delivered. Turji is a good guy, and he's been a friend of the show and a friend of Seldom Used Reserve, always commenting and liking the videos and sharing them. So we wanted to give him a shout out. Also, a little bit of extra here. He's holding an auction today when this airs on September 3rd to benefit a scholarship fund in memory of his nephew. So if you are interested in that and helping out Turji, please just go to either the Pit Boss Sauce Company website, or you can find Turji and the Pit Boss Sauce Company on Facebook. Good guy, great cause.
Very good guy. Very great cause. pitbosssaucecompany.com. It's a really up-and-coming website. You can definitely literally 2 clicks and you'll have some sauce coming to your house, and it's really affordable and really pretty good. So we appreciate everything he does for us, and we hope to return the favor to him.
Absolutely. Hey, we've been talking about him all show. He is on with us. Zach Locks Parker, no pressure today. You're going to be making picks in just a minute, Zach. How's it going?
Good. How are you guys?
Doing good. We're just talking football and the big news out of your neck of the woods, Georgia. So how was the drive home? You're Essential, so did you have to drive home in traffic with a lot of people cussing about their quarterback situation?
Well, it was I actually found out about the news from Casey. He shot me a text, and I was like, wait a minute, that sounds familiar. And I looked it up. I actually didn't even know the kid's name. But every Georgia player did, every Georgia fan did, and everyone in my office, I walked into my other side of my office where all the Georgia fans are, and they were all gasping and sighing. It literally took like 10 minutes, and they had spun it immediately to either Justin Fields, who was at practice last week or 2 weeks ago, or JT Daniels. Daniels is coming off of his injury, and they're going to start him instead. And it was going to make this Wake Forest transfers draft stock drop. So
the spin cycle was in full effect down there.
I mean, it was within 15 minutes of the announcement. It's pretty incredible. Georgia fans have a real practice of this type of thing. So,
well, I'm not really the one to be about conspiracy theories, but what I'm gathering from you, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, is that Justin Fields being at practice a couple weeks ago means he's going to transfer back.
That was just a one-off. Someone mentioned it, and I was like, look, I mean, I think his sister plays track there, and she was, he was there to see her, and he still knows a lot of guys on the team, obviously.
Of course.
But, no, he's not transferring back. There's no way possible. But, this other thing with JT Daniels, and I don't know if he's been cleared to play, but, everybody knows a guy that knows a guy, especially around here. This is it may not be Athens, but it's pretty close here in Savannah. There is on home games, this town gets pretty empty because everyone heads that way. It's not too far of a drive. So a lot of Georgia fans here in Savannah.
Yeah, that's kind of hilarious about Justin Fields. I made that joke, I think, last week that he was going to transfer to Georgia, transfer back to Georgia, then Ohio State was going to decide to play, right? So he's going to go back to Ohio State.
Yeah.
He's going to be the busiest member of the transfer pool. And, I was texting you guys this afternoon because when you were saying that Georgia, is spinning it and looking for the good angle of this, I was thinking, wait a second, South Carolina fans are famous for a spin too. I mean, Clemson was cycling out to a 15-0 season, right? So I was thinking South Carolina fans are going, oh, yeah, SEC East is ours now. That Jamie Newman's not at Georgia. It's all ours, man.
Yeah.
I didn't see much of that. I truly didn't see it. Normally, you're exactly right. They've had the next coming of quarterback here for the last 15 years, I think. But I didn't see a lot of that on the Twitter machine this afternoon after the Jamie Newman. But who knows? It takes a little time to amp it up and get it retweeted and liked and whatever and get it around that tweeter.com, as I call it. So we'll see. We'll see if it's there later on tonight.
All right, fellas, are you ready to make some picks?
Absolutely.
Well, Locks is in, Casey. He's locked in, and we've been giving him a hard time because, when you make picks on a huge podcast in your name, you go by Locks. I mean, no pressure, man. What?
I didn't give myself this name, Marty. Let's just keep that straight, okay?
What could possibly go wrong here?
Oh, my plan has finally come to fruition.
Oh, hilarious. Okay, week one, fellas. First up, Casey's going to go first on this one, Zach, so he can't steal our hot pick on this one. South Alabama is a 15-point underdog to Southern Miss. Now, on our Facebook group, 100% took Southern Miss. That was only 6 votes. We got to do something about the votes, and I think it relates to the schedule, right? Hopefully we'll get more next week when most of the teams are playing, or at least Clemson and some of the ACC teams are playing. Casey.
Yeah, I think we will. I think we'll get a lot more votes next week, and I think I picked most of these games to pick this week, and there wasn't a lot to choose from. But being that the company I work for is based out of Mississippi, and we usually stay in Hattiesburg, I saw Southern Miss, and for my folks in Mississippi, I had to choose it. But South Alabama, man, they were our 15-point underdogs for a reason. They got their offense, Desmond Trotter. He's a sophomore. He looks to be their best shot at a 3 or 4 win season. That's what South Alabama's looking at. He had 8 touchdowns, 2 interceptions last year as a freshman. They returned 6 of 7 of their leading pass receivers, so there might be some promise there at South Alabama. They did lose their big running back, Trey Minter, but they have a couple other guys. Southern Miss, on the other hand, they just win for the most part. They had a rough year last year. They were 7-6, 7-2 in Conference USA, though. New offensive coordinator that led University of Louisiana Monroe to the 17th ranked offense nationally. So they're looking to amp up that offense there in Hattiesburg. 4 starters back on the offensive line. With all that word salad said, I think Southern Miss wins 51-27, which means that they cover that 15-point spread. My pick is Southern Miss.
Wow. Hey, Zach, look who did some reading this afternoon.
I was going to mention, I feel like when I was on a couple weeks ago, there was a comment of, we don't really do any research here. Look at all the papers in front of this guy.
6 pages.
How many trees
6 pages. 2,112 words, all typed out, single space, 11 font. I'm ready.
11 font even. You didn't even step it up to like 22.
Yes, I need 22 at least. That's the minimum. All right, Zach, you're up now. 15-point favorite for Southern Miss. Casey with Southern Miss. So
there's not a lot to add to that analysis, Marty. I don't know where you dug all that up. That's impressive. You must know someone down there in Hattiesburg. That's your stomping grounds. I know you hang out down there sometimes for training. So you've been to the campus. You've seen it all. Probably it's quite a glorious place. But Southern Alabama, like you said, they've lost 4 of their last 5 going back to last year. Not a ton going for them. We'll see a real trend here. I recall from the last couple seasons of doing this with you is the first couple weeks of when they set these lines in Vegas or wherever they set them at, they're pretty conservative with the lines. So I think 15 points is a guarantee for Southern Miss to cover the spread. So I'll take them as well. But you'll see a real trend here. They start dialing in after about half the season, and it gets a lot more difficult.
Yeah, we don't have the best slate here in the first week.
Yeah, it's a tough one to go starting with, but it's all good. We all need practice.
We're already getting laughs out of Casey though. That's all. Besides his shirt, his research is fantastic. You guys said it all, and I don't know what else to say except I'm taking South Alabama in the 15 points. I think this is going to be the first game. Not a lot of training camp, not a lot of who knows what's going to happen. Before you jumped on, Zach, Casey and I were talking. We don't have a clue what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or whatever. I think it's going to be a crazy start to the season. Maybe some crazy turnovers, some loose balls in the first game. I'm going to take the 15 points. If it was 14 or less, I'd go with Southern Miss, but I'm going to take South Alabama. And we already have our first disagreement on the season. This is fantastic, fellas.
Yes.
Fantastic, because I think we're agree on most of what's left. All right. I'll go first on the next one because we're going to do the snake so Casey doesn't steal all our good picks. Not much to say here. I didn't do the Casey level research or even the Zach level research on Army as a 3.5 point favorite over Middle Tennessee State. I don't think Middle Tennessee State's going to be able to stop Army's ground game, and I'll take Army minus 3.5. Okay, that would be Casey. You're up.
All right, here we go with a little bit more. Page 2 of my stats here. Middle Tennessee, coached by former Clemson coordinator Rick Stockstill, who's in his 15th year. That just means that Locks and I are really old because he was we were there. I have an interesting stat and an interesting coaching thing. Scott Schaefer, who was not a very good friend of Dabo Swinney back in the day when he was the head coach at Syracuse, is the defensive coordinator at Middle Tennessee State. I didn't know that, but they're coming off a 4-8 season last year. Not everything was hunky-dory there. Quarterback Asher O'Hara, he's a junior who can sling it, but his real strength is running the football. He had over 1,000 yards rushing last year and 9 touchdowns. Defensively, they couldn't get off the field on third down. That's going to be a problem against Army this year, running that hokey traditional triple option offense. They'll throw it every 5th or 6th series or so. But Army had a rough year last year as well, coming off the season before where they were bowl eligible. They were 5-8 last year, led by Jeff Monken in his 7th year. All that word salad to be said, I have Army 35, Middle Tennessee 26, which means Army covers that 3.5 point spread.
Hey, Zach, Casey's even given us scores here.
Yeah, is this a wrinkle? Was this a side text?
I just felt I had to figure out the score and then add the math with the minus and the plus. And
there's only so many ways to score. You got 3s and 7s and 1s and 2.
It's math, man.
All right. Army, Middle Tennessee State, 3.5 points. Who you got, Zach?
All right, so the over-under in this one's 56 points. Before Army lost their last game last year to Navy, they had put up 31 points, 47 points, 63 points. That being said, 56 is the over-under. I see Army scoring the majority of those. It's going to be much more than 3.5. I got Army with the cover.
All right. We all three pick Army. I'll go first on the next game. Memphis is a 19-point favorite over Arkansas State. Again, first game of the season. Memphis is getting a lot of love, and they're typically pretty good. But for some reason, I think my boys from Arkansas State, and this is gonna sound like this is a Casey pick right here. I like their uniforms; they look good, and I'm gonna take them. I'm gonna take Arkansas State plus 19. Zach, you're up.
I don't even know what their uniforms look like. Is that bad? I like Memphis in this one, even though, tragically, if you haven't seen it, Kenneth Gainwell opted out for COVID with his family, and 4 family members contracted the virus. His uncle was actually laid to rest this past weekend, so he's out. That's a bit of a blow, but this Memphis team was very good last year. They returned their quarterback for over 4,000 yards last year. Got a great receiver, DeMonte Coxey also. I do know their uniforms. They have the blue Cincinnati Bengals stripes on the helmets. Those are pretty sweet. So I got Memphis covering the 19 there. They're going to run it up. It's there to win.
So you guys are, I won't say this, but you guys are heavy on the favorites. This is really interesting here. Casey the Beef Creek, could you get out your War and Peace notes on the Memphis?
Arkansas State Red Wolves, coached by feel-good story Blake Anderson, who tragically lost his wife to cancer before the season started last year. Great story. He still persevered. He loved his guys, rallied around his guys. I followed them the rest of the year. They ended up 8-5 overall, 5-3 in the Sun Belt Conference. Had a really pretty electric offense other than the games that they played against the SEC. I think they got blown out. They didn't score against Georgia. I think it was 59-0. Otherwise, did all right in their conference. QB Logan Bonner should win his job back after thumb surgery. Derailed his 2019 season, but he can flat out sling it. All 5 offensive linemen return. That's a good thing because it was rated – I'm not sure it's a good thing because it was rated one of the worst in the country on tackles for losses. But defensively, they finished 124th in the country last year. It doesn't look good. Now we get to Memphis, who rolled last year 12-2. Mike McIntyre is the defensive coordinator, former national coach of the year at Colorado. They lost Mike Norvell to Florida State. Offensively, they were 10th in the nation, but like Zach said, they lost Kenneth Gainwell. Brady White is the quarterback. He's back after throwing for those 4,000 yards, 33 touchdowns. Receiving room lost a bunch of guys. Anyway, interesting stat of Memphis before I make my pick. They won 57 games in the last 6 years. In the previous 13 years, they only won 59 games total. Memphis 55, Arkansas State 30. That means 38. That means Arkansas State will cover the 19 points.
Oh, you ruined my next joke was going to be you guys have agreed on every pick so far, but
nope.
On that. All right, Casey, you're up again. You'll have to. I don't know. What are you on? Page 84? SMU.
Good at a drawer.
I'll slow it down this next time for the
SMU is coming almost into my backyard here to take on Texas State as a 22-point favorite. Rock and roll, Casey. Take as long as you want, Casey.
Where is Texas State? What town is that?
Marcos, Texas.
Okay. All right. San Marcos.
I said I researched one game. This would be the one. I'm going to share some crazy, interesting stats with you.
Awesome. So Texas State Bobcats, coached by second-year head coach Jake Spavital. Sorry, Jake, I butchered your name. He was the offensive coordinator under Dana Holgorsen at West Virginia for 2 seasons. Took over the job 3-9 last year, hired his brother as the defensive coordinator, who was the co-defensive coordinator at Texas Tech. I didn't know they played defense in the Big 12. Offensively, they were a woeful 318 yards a game with 18.4 points per game. They have a huge unknown at quarterback. Tyler Vitt seems to have the inside track on the starter role. He had 11 touchdowns, 14 interceptions last year. They do have a transfer from Memphis, Brady McBride. He's eligible, may get a look as well. Young receivers, yada, yada. Defensively, all things considered, from a woeful offense, the defense was not terrible, which I like. Interesting stat on Texas State. Team won just 13 games in the last 5 years and only 7 against FBS competition. SMU, Sonny Dykes takes his 3rd year. That's crazy that Chad Morris has been gone that long. He's 15-11 overall. Nothing about their coaching staff interests me too much other than their offensive coordinator was at Appalachian State last year. How about that? 10-3 they were last year, 6-2 in the American Conference. Shane Buechele, Texas transfer, returns to SMU for his 2nd season. He had a big year last year, over 4,000 yards, 34 touchdowns. Big play receivers coming in. I got SMU 51, Texas State 20. That means SMU covers the 22 points.
Hey, Zach, I think we figured out somebody has invested in a Las Vegas website to get all kinds of interesting information, but he doesn't have information on Texas State like I have. Wasn't Spavital, by the way, wasn't Spavital at Texas A&M when old Johnny was back there slinging the ball around and causing trouble?
Well, what was the question?
Okay, Mr. Aggie, you should already know that if you're an Aggie. What's wrong with you?
I don't know.
Texas State is my hometown team. their stadium, where this game will take place, by the way. SMU's on the road. Hello. 8.9 miles from my house. It's closer to my house than Darrell K. Roy Memorial Stadium is, which is other end of I-35, not the end, but 20 miles the other way. So did you know that Texas State has an alumni that was president of the United States? Lyndon Baines Johnson went to then, I think it was called Southwest Texas Teachers College or something. Did you know when they were Southwest Texas State, they won back-to-back national championships, Division II, 27-1 under Jim Wacker, who eventually went to TCU and I think Minnesota or somewhere. Did you know that Texas State had a quarterback drafted in 1999 before Tom Brady? Yes. Soon-to-be Hall of Famer Spurgeon Wynn was drafted before Tom Brady in 1999. Now, all of that has nothing to do with this game, but my next stat does. They lost by 30 to SMU last year. And they lost a whole bunch off a really bad team, which, as Casey pointed out earlier, could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. Who knows? But what I do know is their 3 wins last year were Georgia State, Nichols, and aforementioned South Alabama. Every time they played a FBS team of any note, they got crushed, including SMU by 30. They have the 118th returning production number. Good or bad? Not sure. I'm not sure, but I know one thing. Texas State is not good. I know that. They haven't been good for some time, and I'm going to take SMU. I went back and forth because this spread jumped over 21, gave me some cause for pause. Then I looked up the stats, and it's got to be SMU. What you got, Locks?
All right. Let me break out my notebook here on all that. You guys covered it.
I brought you presidents of the United States.
I am floored at the research from you two. I really am. This is tremendous. I'm learning like history facts. Turn on Jeopardy. I got to answer at least one question out of here. I mean, goodness. I have basically written down what you guys have said. SMU had their first 10-win season since 1984 last year. Then, like Marty said, they beat Texas State 47-17. Beat them by 30 points. They're 22-point favorites. Like you said, SMU greater than Texas State. That's all it's to it. I got SMU covering easy.
One thing that I found interesting that for Texas State too, and we're not used to seeing this being Clemson folks, but their wide receivers, they added 3 transfers at the wide receiver position. They also added two transfers at the running back position. So these guys are just meeting each other pretty much the first year. They're ready to roll. They just load up with transfers. I guess guys that want that second chance, they'll transfer to San Marcos, Texas, to Texas State and have a chance to at least play some decent competition.
See, I didn't even give you guys all the facts. Did you know that Texas State was the 5th largest university in the state of Texas? It's also it's one of the biggest party schools in the nation. You know, if you're transferring there for that this year, it's kind of bad news. But it's bad timing. But it's a huge school. It's kind of like the opposite of Miami. You know, we think of Miami as this huge school, this football program. It's totally the opposite. And Texas State is the opposite of that. You just think about, where is that? I've never heard of Texas State. 30,000 students. They're approaching, you know, as I said, the 5th largest university in Texas, which, you know, is known for big, giant universities. All right, guys, we were going to wrap it up with the Monday night Labor Day game. Not your typical Monday night Labor Day game we've been seeing, like Florida State and Louisville or one of those type of games. We have the Navy Midshipmen and the BYU Cougars. Now, I'll go first on this one. And I did a lot of deep research here. You're going to love this research too, Zach. BYU has a bunch of grown men, 26-year-old offensive linemen. Now, typically that's a big advantage, but these Navy guys, we know they don't take any crap and they run a unique offense. This actually changed. Earlier in the week, BYU was the underdog, and now they were and now they are the favorite. Or I got that backwards. BYU is the favorite. Now they're the underdog. I'm going to take BYU. I just think the old guys win this one.
Who you want to go next? Go ahead, Lon.
All right. The game is at Navy. BYU has to travel. A little something to it, you know. We didn't talk much about this during any of these picks. There are home teams, there are away teams, but again, is this going to matter that much without a crowd, without much of a crowd, if there's going to be any? The travel is one thing, coming all the way from Utah to Maryland, but Navy can score too. Last 4 games, 20 points, 31 points, 56 points, 35 points. All 4 of those were wins too. Over/under set at 52.5. I got Navy. I think it's not going to be a blowout, but it'll probably be a touchdown, maybe even a 10-point game. I don't think it's going to be a 3-point game though. But even if it is, they're still going to cover it. Hey,
Navy wasn't scoring against 26-year-old grown men there, Zach. So we'll see how that works out. Casey, who you got?
BYU has Kalani Sitake in his 5th year. He's 27-25 overall as the head coach. An interesting coaching note is Jeff Grimes is in his 3rd year at BYU. He's the offensive coordinator. He was the run game coordinator at LSU. So apparently they've had that in their system, not just the last year, which took a lot of notice from having so much success as they had. They were 7-6 last year. They are an independent, so who knows what their schedule is going to be like this year. They averaged 444 yards of offense plus 28.5 points a game, which is pretty decent for BYU. I know they had a great game with Tennessee, which they inevitably lost at the end there. Against the better teams, though, they failed to go over 360 yards, and that includes Tennessee, Utah, Washington, and Boise State. They do have a returning starter. He's only 37 years old, Zach Wilson. He's the quarterback. He's in his 15th year as quarterback at BYU. It seems like those quarterbacks stay there forever. So I'm sorry. They have all 5 starters back on the offensive line. Wide receivers and running backs, they don't know who they have. They go on mission. They come back. It's tough to get a handle on what they have at the skill positions there at BYU. Anything that I read doesn't really throw one significant name. And defensively, from everything that I've read, the defense will be nothing too spectacular, but not too terrible either. Navy, Ken Niumatalolo. That's right, Ken Niumatalolo is in his 13th year at Navy. He's 98-60. Ivan Jasper is the 2nd longest tenured offensive coordinator in the country. He's in his 21st year. But when they run that triple option, what else does he have to, I guess his job is safe. Triple option all day. They do have to replace their 2,000-yard runner / quarterback, Malcolm Perry, who was a star in that Army-Navy game last year. These military academies seem to have more than 85 players on their roster. Navy had 9 running backs on their roster. They had 11 quarterbacks on their roster. So I don't know how they get around it. Maybe it's the military thing, but it's pretty funny to see that. So they have options. Do the receivers really matter here? They do have one that's 6'5", Michael Cooper, who can get deep apparently, but will we actually see that? A lot of turnover on the offensive line. Defensively, big up front, athletic linebackers, yada, 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 yada. I had another really good – that's this interesting stat on Navy was 6 running backs had multiple touches a year ago on that offense. 6. That's like Clemson. Anyway, word salad aside, Navy 24, BYU 20. Navy covers that 1.5 point spread.
All right.
Nice.
I like this because you guys went against me quite a bit, or I went against you. Let's do a little summary, quick summary here. I got Casey, Southern Miss, Army, Arkansas State, SMU, and Navy. Marty, South Alabama, Army, Arkansas State, SMU, and BYU. And Zach, locks, Parker, got to get the locks in there. Southern Miss, Army, Memphis, SMU, and Navy. All right, guys, I appreciate it. Hey, Zach, thanks for stopping by, and we'll talk to you next week. Hopefully you'll be 1-4.
Oh, I don't think so.
All right, next week.
All right, y'all be
Thanks,
good.
Sluggo. See ya.
All right. Casey the Beef, that was a lot of fun. You did more research than I was expecting, honestly. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah, well, I went down the rabbit hole today, in all honesty. I didn't want to not know who these teams were. So there were teams in there like Texas State and even Arkansas State to some degree who I don't watch on a regular basis. I do try to watch Navy because I have friends that played there, and I just like their style. My family went to Army, so I do watch some of their games. But anyway, long story short, I just wanted to know who these guys were, who the quarterbacks were, who the coaches were, blah, blah, blah. And then after game one, I said, well, how can I do that for game one and not do that for game two? And literally 6 pages and 2,000 words later, it only took me about 45 minutes. I took a lunch today to do it. But yeah, it was fun. I mean, there was a lot in there that I probably dragged on with a little bit, but I'm going to continue to probably do that week in, week out, just for my own good, and I'll spew out the interesting stats and stuff.
Oh, it's football, so that's kind of the best research you can do. Talking about football, so that's great. Not a strong week, as we mentioned, not a strong slate this week. It'll pick up next week. We'll have a lot more fun and hopefully 5 better games, or at least more high-profile games. Before we get out of here, I wanted to tell you, I've given you a couple of Netflix recommendations, and I saw another one a few weeks back that I didn't share with you yet, but I did want to share it with you because of your time. I know you're a basketball guy, right? You were a manager at Clemson. So it's called Basketball or Nothing. Have you seen this?
I have not.
Okay. Everything I tell you about, you haven't seen, so it's worked out. And you're really lying really well, or apparently you don't watch much Netflix.
Well, I'll tell you, before you go on, I used to tell people, because I was an actor in my day too. I did a lot of theater, and people in my groups of friends always watched movies, and I didn't see them. So I was literally the only actor that never watched stuff. If it's not sports, I'm not really watching, but this is sports related. And so yeah. I will look it up.
It's a documentary about a high school on a reservation in Arizona. Native American kids, great story about the teamwork and what it took, and follows them through a season at a huge high school. Good deal.
I've seen it. I have seen it. See that? I didn't know the name, but I have seen it. Yeah.
No problem.
I love stories like that. I love those type of stories.
Well, for anybody else who hasn't seen it and you're a basketball fan or just a fan of high school kids, hey, I've got a kid going into high school, so it kind of hit me. Basketball or Nothing on Netflix. Before we get Amy in here, Casey, I wanted to give a shout out to Nelson Wilhite for helping us out on the Facebook group, which is now over 1,000 people. Shawn Flood is generally active on our Facebook group and likes the podcast and shares it. We appreciate that. And, of course, Hali Vasquez. One day you're going to tell me how to say your name, and this won't be fun anymore. And my last shout out goes to Parker Coleman, who the next time we talk will be a high schooler, Casey. I can't.
How does that make you feel?
Old. All right. Hey, it was a lot of fun tonight having Zach in. Next week we'll have Jason Priester of allclemson.com. Zach will come back to do picks. Hopefully we'll have it down a little more smoother. Casey will have pounds and pounds of research, and I'll fly by the seat of my pants. All right, Beef. Have a good evening, man. Appreciate it.
You too. Thanks so much. Producer Amy, how'd we do tonight?
I think that sounds pretty good.